if you have a mortgage, where to begin, Jessica?
Right. So if you have suffered any sort of financial hardship, unfortunately, if you've been laid off or been furloughed due to the coronavirus crisis, the biggest step you can take is to call your bank, because with the CARES Act, it really gives homeowners two different types of relief options. And the first big thing is if you have a federally backed loan, it prevents lenders from beginning any sort of foreclosure process on that if for at least 60 days after March 18th. And keep in mind, we are already in May, so that is coming up in the middle of this month. But the second big thing is that if you are a homeowner and you've experienced that kind of hardship from the pandemic, you can request forbearance for up to 180 days. And then if you still have a hardship after that, you can still request it up to an additional 6 months after that. So you really have a year's worth of relief of forbearance that you can get. And a lot of people might not know that. And I think the biggest takeaway is this is for federally backed loans. So you really need to keep in mind, do you have a federally backed loan, or is this backed through the bank? And so those are the typical things that have confused a lot of homeowners right now.
So it sounds like there are a lot of options and that we can negotiate. I think, that feels intimidating probably to a lot of people, but you're saying like get on the phone and hang in there with people, that there could be any number of loan modifications available to you.
So there are a number of options. And I think the biggest thing from the CARES Act, it left this loophole where the law doesn't necessarily specify what happens after the forbearance period ends. And so a lot of different banks have warned different borrowers that they might be having to force them to pay a lump sum, as far as, say, if you got a 3-month reprieve, and if after the 90 days comes up, you might have to pay that lump sum on day 91. But the CFPB has come out and said that's not the case. If you have a federally backed loan, you can still ask for either more forbearance, or you could do a loan modification process. So depending on what your income level is, and say if you were furloughed and you did go back to work, you could work with them as far as extending that loan, putting those on the back end of the loan. But it is a little bit different. You could do that with federally backed loans. That might not necessarily work if your servicer owns your loan, say if you directly have that loan through Chase or Wells Fargo. So if you do run up into those issues, the CFPB said if you feel like you aren't getting the type of relief that you really need, you can file a complaint with them and they'll follow up.
Oh, can you, CFPB, for all of our people who aren't like hip to the lingo, what is that short for?
The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So basically, They have a number of options where you can file a complaint with them if you feel like you aren't getting those types of relief, or if you feel like your bank isn't helping you enough. And if you are, say, you do have a private loan, that might work for you because you don't exactly have the same kind of rights with the CARES Act as you would. So they're also through the CFPB. They have on their website different housing counselors that are through the Department of Housing Urban Development that could also discuss options with you if you're having trouble having to pay your mortgage and you feel like you need some sort of counselor there that can help you negotiate with your lender. If you feel like they're forcing you to have a payment option that you feel like you really can't pay. So you should really go through the CFPB's website and see what kind of options of help that you have. They even have, hopefully it doesn't get to this situation, but if you need any sort of lawyer or something like that, they have a local bar association website that you can work with, or legal aid.
Oh my gosh, Jessica, there's so many facts there. Thank you so much. That was a really comprehensive answer. I'm going to go to Sharice. So many Americans rent. And so the idea of like having a mortgage, like great, good for you, you bought a house. But for most people, a lot of Americans are renting. And there has been, I think, a lot of confusion around the way the CARES Act can help protect renters. So first of all, start there. It offers some relief. What does that look like?
Yeah, so the Federal CARES Act has a lot of housing assistance in the billions of dollars, and some of that is designated for tenants who live in federally subsidized housing, a housing project, or they have a voucher for an affordable unit, or if you live in a building that has a private federally backed mortgage. And basically it says that you cannot be evicted during this crisis period. And of course, you don't necessarily know if you live in a building that has that kind of a loan or mortgage. So there are some resources, some tools you can access to find out if your property is protected. The National Low Income Housing Coalition, for instance, you can go to their website, they have a tool, you can look up your property and find out. But there is help so that you don't get kicked out onto the street because of what's going on right now in the country.
Okay, so that's reassuring. You also mentioned, as we're showing here, you can find out whether or not your community has an eviction moratorium. So talk to us about like how those are structured and what that means.
Yeah, so more than half the states and more than 100 cities have a moratorium on evictions. And it's very important to understand that that is not a rent freeze or rent cancellation. So you might still be on the hook for late fees and for those payments once this period is over. You just can't be kicked out. So you can do a Google search and see what's happening in your city or in your state to find out if that's in place. There are charities that are local that might be able to help you figure out where you stand with that. But again, you have to remember that it just means you can't be evicted, but it's not going to help you in the end when you have to make up those payments.
Okay, that's good to know. And I mean, again, these things are, we are just trying to provide resources and support to everybody watching to say like, hey, we know these are kind of like anxiety provoking times. And when you get a minute to yourself, like you can sit down and say like, hey, I can take control of some of these things. And Charisse, I really appreciate you talking about that. You also mentioned advocacy.org can help you find some of the resources you need.
Yeah, so the Urban Institute has found about 43 programs across the country at least that are helping people to get rental assistance. And again, the National Low Income Housing Coalition has a resource page on its site. You can go to Google and just look up and see what local charities are doing. But basically that can give you that financial bridge that a lot of people need. Because again, if they're not evicted, they may still owe back rent and they're going to need some financial assistance in order to cover that. They vary. I mean, sometimes the payment goes right to your landlord. Sometimes it goes to the tenant. You may have to prove you lost your job. There might be an income gap or a limit that you have to meet. But there is help out there, and there are places that you can go to find out what local organizations are offering. Some cities are doing it, LA and Boston, for instance. So there is assistance if you need that financial lifeline.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, check out these other videos from USA Today to stay up to date with all the latest news.